Welcome to another short, bringing you another part, another character from the Chronicles of Dragondom and beyond. Today we're looking at the dark contagion, the virus, which plays a part throughout the series. Let us go back. Do you want to journey with me to the beginning of the virus and where it was created? The harnessing and duplication, corrupting the conscious essence so it could be controlled, or so they thought in the labs so long ago. Yes, I have been there, way back then, on another planet, a planet to which humanity now looks to return. Or are we already working there? In the beginning, it was just a floating consciousness out in deep outer space, floating aimlessly, content. During the Great Wars, it had found food in a way like never before, roving through the far-off battlegrounds, attaching initially to the remnants of destroyed stations and platforms out in the furthest extent of our universe, close to the universal connection, the universal bridge, acting like a parasitical cleaner, feasting on the residual energy of those left behind. Eons passed, and with nothing to stop it and plenty to sustain it, it grew and modified. It did not notice the change, but there was a change in the quality of the food, a lower vibration in many, that in itself seemed to cause a change in its own being. Eventually leaving and travelling again, but this time in search of a new food supply. Now a hunter, consciously seeking something physical to feed upon, as the normal cosmic plasma, which had always been its sustenance, no longer accommodated it, and in fact moved hastily away from any contact because of the low vibrational thing that it had become. First sadness became its thought, along with loneliness. Then eventually this turned to anger and hate, accompanying its growing hunger. So it started to consciously feel out for spacecrafts and isolated platforms, where the crew, and in some cases the structure itself, would become its food. Now no longer acting as a cleaner of residual essence, but creating sickness to allow it to feed on the whole essence. It had changed. Sickness and the fear that ran through the bodies of the crews now were almost a drug to it. It thirsted now, not only for food, but to learn, to understand where the food originated, so that, if needed in the future, it could home in on a better and more sustainable source. The pleadings of the plasmic consciousness, the old world, that warm connection it had been content with, now faded, and it believed this was just because it had outgrown that comfortable connection. It had evolved and thus no longer needed the protection. It was becoming more knowledgeable and understanding slowly its own power as something others feared. Yes, it was beginning to understand the words, the emotions of those it fed on and assimilated as it sucked them dry. Moving through quadrants, still keeping only to the space stations and debris, for now at least, but logging the planetary areas and the data it could glean, it kept finding references to the thing called the Old Empire. These, then, posed a conundrum in its core, as the realization came into being that this group, whoever they were also feeding on the good food. Maybe it was time to hunt them down and find out more. After all, now it was a massive and powerful entity and could assimilate anything if it so desired. Yet, was it? Up until now, It had never looked to anything which might be able to fight against it, or worse still, entrap it. Now, as it connected to the hull of this latest star-based platform, it found a difference. Unlike others, this seemed to have no consciousness in the usual way. For a while it was confused, but, as was its way, as it oozed across the memory boards, slowly it became aware of how to retrieve knowledge, but not food. Yes, here were new streams of knowledge, new maps, new star systems it had not found before. There was also the schematics of creatures which seemed to work this station, and which it seemed to have no power to feed on, because they had no essence. There was also the continuous reference to the old empire, and something called the brain, also referred to as the hive core. Normally it would have simply digested these bits of information and worked on understanding it as it travelled on, always moving to find the next battleground. However, there was much to learn here, and for now it would stay and study. Time passed. To any looking at the station from outside, they would see the dark, almost gelatinous infestation that formed around the airlocks and joints of the external hull. The platform was still operational, as it was fully manned by robots, so only if a craft arrived in transit would any of this come to light, and so for a long time the being had not been disturbed. That was until a small group of cyborg fighters had needed to dock to make repairs on their way back to their own base from a skirmish with the Federation crafts. They had been damaged and could not use their hyperdrive to exit as usual, and thus were travelling through this outer sector of the galaxy. The lead pilot asked for permission to land and make repairs, and permission was granted. While slightly perplexed by the seemingly live dark fungi on the exterior, he had ordered all craft to enter the now opening dock bay and get repairs done as quickly as possible. He would go to the central command deck and send word back to their home base as to what had happened and the reason they had been delayed and the lack of communication from their group. The entity had felt the change as soon as the docking bay doors opened. It pulled itself back slightly and scanned the entering crafts. Who dared to disturb it? Then it picked up on the partially humanoid essence within the pilots. Yes, essence mixed with electronics, but food nonetheless, and suddenly it was aware of its hunger. Why not tune in to get the rest of this short story and find out what happened next, and how the labs of the old empire got their hands on what has become known as the virus.